I have what you asked for.
What is in the box?
That's not your concern.
Stop right there!
We have breaking news. An unexpected announcement has shocked the nation.
Oh my God!
What is happening?
This can't be real!
Whoa!
Kwame, a wealthy businessman, lived with his wife Amina and their two children, Tariq and Zara, in a grand mansion. The family was rich and they loved luxury. However, they didn't seem to appreciate the hard work that went into building their wealth. Amina often showed off her expensive jewelry, while Tariq and Zara would demand the latest gadgets and designer clothes without a second thought. It seemed like they took everything for granted. One day, Kwame became tired of the way his family treated him. They had grown so arrogant and selfish, always thinking about money and status, without caring about the love and sacrifices that had helped them get where they were. He realized that they didn't truly value him or his efforts. This made him decide to teach them a lesson, but in a way they would never expect. He thought, what if I pretend to lose everything? What if I show them what life is like without money? So Kwame secretly sold his businesses, emptied his bank accounts, and left his luxurious mansion. He moved to a small house on the outskirts of the city and started living like a common man. His goal was simple. He wanted to see how his family would react when they no longer had his wealth to rely on. When he returned home and told his family about the loss of all his money, their reactions were cold. Amina, his wife, barely showed any sympathy. She quickly began looking for a new rich man, fearing she might have to live without the lifestyle she had become accustomed to. Tariq and Zara didn't seem to care either. They only worried about how they would continue to live their high society life without their father's wealth. Kwame watched them from a distance, heartbroken by their lack of concern. But he knew that this was part of his plan, and he hoped that one day they would realize their mistakes. He thought that by living without his riches, he could finally teach them the value of love, family, and humility. However, as the days passed, Kwame couldn't help but feel conflicted. Was he doing the right thing by betraying his family's trust in this way? The once close-knit family was now divided. Kwame's bold decision was pushing them further apart, but he was determined to see it through. He needed his family to feel the consequences of their greed and arrogance. He was hoping that by the end of this experiment, they would be forever changed. But little did he know, the events that would unfold over the coming months would surprise him in ways he could never imagine. When Kwame told his wife Amina and their children, Tariq and Zara, that he had lost all his wealth, they didn't know how to react. At first, they thought he was joking. But when it became clear that he was serious, the truth hit them hard. Amina, who had always loved luxury and fine things, was the first to speak. Her face showed no sign of sadness, only shock. She quickly began to panic, her thoughts racing. Without Kwame's money, how would she live? The grand lifestyle she had enjoyed for so long was slipping away, and she didn't know what to do. Amina's first reaction was to look for a new, wealthy man. She started thinking about how she could secure her future. She wasn't interested in finding a way to support herself. All she cared about was her status. In her mind, she needed to maintain the image of wealth and success, even if it meant depending on someone else. The love she had once shared with Kwame seemed to disappear the moment money was no longer involved. Tariq and Zara, too, were stunned. They had always taken their father's wealth for granted, never thinking about how hard Kwame worked to provide for them. Now that the money was gone, they realized that their lifestyle was in danger. They were no longer able to get everything they wanted. No more brand new phones, no more expensive clothes, no more vacations to exotic places. They didn't know how to live without their father's money, and the thought of a simpler life was frightening to them. Tariq, who had once been so proud of his wealthy lifestyle, now felt embarrassed. He couldn't imagine going back to a normal life. Zara, the younger of the two, was equally upset, feeling confused and helpless. The life they had known for so long seemed to be slipping away, and they didn't know how to hold on to it. As the days passed, Kwame's family became distant. Amina focused on finding a new rich man, while Tariq and Zara struggled with their new reality. They no longer showed any affection towards Kwame. The family that had once been so close was now falling apart, and Kwame watched helplessly from the sidelines. The more time passed, the more Kwame realized how deep the arrogance and greed ran in his family. He thought that his plan would teach them a lesson, but instead, it seemed to be pushing them further away. It was painful to watch his family change, but Kwame knew he had to stay true to his decision. He had to teach them that life wasn't just about money. It was about love, respect, and family. But as the distance between them grew, Kwame began to wonder if they would ever learn this lesson. After leaving his family, Kwame settled into a small, modest apartment on the outskirts of the city. Gone were the days of grand mansions, expensive cars, and luxury vacations. His new home was small, with worn-out furniture and minimal decoration. The neighborhood was nothing like the one he had lived in before. It was simple and humble, filled with hard-working people who lived paycheck to paycheck. At first, Kwame felt out of place. He missed the comfort of his old life, the fancy dinners, the lavish parties, the attention that came with being rich. But slowly, he began to see the world in a different light. He spent his days helping people in the neighborhood, buying groceries for an elderly woman, giving food to a hungry child, and offering advice to those struggling to make ends meet. He found a sense of peace and satisfaction in helping others, something he hadn't felt in a long time. The more time Kwame spent in this new life, the more he realized how disconnected he had been from the struggles of everyday people. He had always been surrounded by wealth and luxury, but now he was experiencing the reality of life without money. He was no longer the man with all the answers, the one everyone looked up to. Instead, he was just another person trying to make a living. Although the life was harder, Kwame began to feel a sense of purpose he had never known before. He was learning to appreciate the little things, simple meals, kind gestures, and genuine connections with others. It wasn't the life he had imagined, but it was a life that felt real. He no longer took things for granted. He realized that the true value of life wasn't in money, but in love, compassion, and humility. Kwame also started to understand the flaws in his own character. For years, he had worked tirelessly to build his wealth, thinking that money was the key to happiness. But now, without wealth, he saw that there were other, more important things in life. He began to see the flaws in his family's behavior too. His wife's obsession with luxury and his children's entitlement were symptoms of a deeper problem. But despite all of this, Kwame's heart ached for them. He still loved them and hoped that one day, they would realize what truly mattered. However, living in humility wasn't easy for Kwame. There were moments when he felt the sting of loneliness and regret. He missed his family, even though they had shown little care for him in return. But he knew that this journey was necessary, not just for them, but for himself. He needed to prove to his family, and to himself, that life could be meaningful without wealth. And even though he was struggling, he felt that he was finally on the right path. As time passed, Amina, Tariq, and Zara began to feel the weight of Kwame's absence. Life without the billionaire father they had taken for granted was harder than they had ever imagined. The money was gone, and with it, their easy, luxurious lifestyle. Amina, once obsessed with designer clothes, jewelry, and social events, found herself struggling to make ends meet. The lavish dinners and expensive outings were now distant memories, replaced with tight budgets and limited options. Amina tried to keep up appearances, but it wasn't easy. She couldn't afford the things she had once considered essential. She tried looking for wealthy men to date, hoping they could provide the financial security she had lost, but it wasn't as simple as she had thought. The men she met didn't offer the same lavish lifestyle that Kwame had provided. They were not interested in her the way they once were, when she was married to a rich man. Amina started feeling the sting of rejection, realizing that her value had always been tied to her husband's wealth. Meanwhile, Tariq and Zara also faced their own struggles. Tariq, once the proud owner of the latest gadgets and the most expensive clothes, now found himself wearing outdated clothes and using old phones. He felt embarrassed whenever his friends invited him out, knowing he couldn't afford the same experiences they could. The friends who had once surrounded him because of his father's wealth began to distance themselves, no longer interested in him when he had nothing to offer. Zara, the younger daughter, found herself in a similar situation. She had been used to being spoiled with shopping sprees and extravagant gifts, but now she couldn't even afford a new pair of shoes. The social media accounts where she had once posted pictures of her glamorous life became empty. Her followers started unfollowing her as she no longer had the luxury and glamour they admired. She felt lost, without the image she had worked so hard to create. The entire family, once so accustomed to wealth, was now struggling to keep up. The reality of their situation hit hard. Amina's pride and obsession with wealth clashed with her new reality. Tariq and Zara, who had always lived in their own bubble of privilege, now faced the harsh truth of life without luxury. They realized that they had been living in a world of illusion, a world that had now crumbled around them. But amidst the struggle, there were moments of change. Amina, though reluctant, began to look at life differently. She started understanding that her worth was not just about money. Tarek and Zara, though still angry at their father for putting them in this situation, began to see the value of hard work and humility. The struggle was difficult, but it was opening their eyes to the reality they had ignored for so long. Kwame, watching from afar, felt a mixture of sadness and hope. He had hoped his family would change, but seeing them suffer like this made him question if he had done the right thing. The pain was real, but so was the possibility of change. One day, Kwame decided to return to the family's mansion. He had been living a humble life for months now, and although his heart still ached for his family, he felt like it was time to see how they were coping without him. He didn't tell them he was coming back. Instead, he watched from a distance, hidden in the shadows of the mansion's tall gates. From where he stood, Kwame could see Amina, Tarek, and Zara in the front yard, looking tired and worn out. The mansion, which once seemed like a symbol of success and wealth, now felt empty. The once beautifully maintained garden had grown wild, and the windows, which were always spotless, now looked dusty. The family that had once lived in luxury now seemed to be struggling to keep up appearances. Kwame noticed how Amina, who used to dress in expensive clothes, now wore simple outfits. She had changed, but not in the way he had hoped. Her face was still proud, but there was a look of worry in her eyes. She was no longer the confident woman who always thought money would fix everything. She looked vulnerable and uncertain. Tarek and Zara were no longer the confident, entitled young adults they had once been. They seemed quieter, more reserved. Tarek was sitting on the front porch, his head down, lost in thought. Zara, too, was no longer her usual cheerful self. She was standing by the driveway, looking at the empty space where their luxury cars used to park. Kwame couldn't help but feel a sense of sadness as he watched them. The family he had once loved deeply had changed, but the change wasn't exactly what he had hoped for. He had wanted them to learn humility, to realize that life wasn't just about wealth and status. But now, seeing them struggle, he wondered if it was too late for them to truly understand. Despite his own feelings of betrayal and anger, Kwame still loved his family. He had never wanted them to suffer. He had wanted to teach them a lesson, but he never intended to break them. Now, as he watched them from afar, he realized that his plan had worked to some extent. They were no longer as arrogant as before. But they were hurting, and that hurt was something Kwame didn't want to see. Kwame knew that it was time to reveal himself. He couldn't stay hidden forever. He had to let his family know that he was back, but he also had to figure out how to fix the damage he had caused. The decision weighed heavily on him. Should he confront them now, or wait until they had suffered more? His love for them pulled him in one direction, while his pain and frustration pushed him in another. After watching his family for some time, Kwame decided to return to the mansion. He no longer cared about the wealth or luxury. All he wanted was for his family to understand the lessons he had tried to teach them. He loved them, despite everything that had happened, but he needed to see if they had truly learned anything from their struggles. Kwame's plan was simple. He didn't want to confront them directly just yet. Instead, he began to help them secretly. He would leave small amounts of money in unexpected places, pay bills for the mansion, and take care of small things that they hadn't been able to handle on their own. At first, they didn't know where the help was coming from, but they could feel a change. The family was slowly becoming aware that someone was looking out for them. Amina was the first to notice. One morning, when she was going through the bills, she found that a few of the most urgent ones had been paid. There were no notes, no names, just the evidence that someone had been helping. She was confused but grateful. It wasn't enough to make her stop looking for another rich man, but it did make her pause. She didn't know who had done this, but she couldn't help but feel a sense of guilt. Maybe she hadn't fully appreciated what she had before. Tarek and Zara also noticed the mysterious help. Tarek, in particular, was puzzled. He knew that they could no longer afford the lifestyle they once had, so the unexpected financial assistance felt like a sign. At first, he didn't want to admit it, but deep down, he began to wonder if his father had secretly been helping them all along. Zara, more emotional, began to reflect on how they had treated Kwame. She had taken him for granted, assuming he would always be there to fix everything. Kwame didn't reveal himself immediately. He wanted to see how his family would react to the help. Would they accept it without question, or would they begin to question their past behavior? Slowly, they started to realize that their father might still care for them, even after all they had put him through. But for them to truly change, they would have to acknowledge their mistakes. The family's pride and anger had slowly turned into guilt. They didn't know who was helping them, but they knew they had to change. The The lessons Kwame had hoped to teach them were slowly sinking in. Yet Kwame was still hesitant. Could he forgive them after all that had happened? Could he trust them again? He loved his family deeply, but their past actions had hurt him deeply as well. This was the test. Kwame knew that forgiving them would take time, and he needed to decide whether they were truly worthy of his forgiveness. He could see that they were starting to change, but was it enough? Only time would tell if they would be able to earn back his trust and love. Kwame's plan to test his family had worked, but not in the way he had hoped. The mysterious help he had been secretly providing them had softened their hearts, but it also led to a moment of deep betrayal. One evening, Kwame finally decided it was time to reveal himself to his family. He had been watching them long enough and could see that they were beginning to understand the lessons he had hoped they would learn. It was time to confront them face to face. Kwame arranged a meeting with Amina, Tariq, and Zara at the mansion. When they gathered in the living room, Kwame stood before them, his face filled with both pain and hope. "I've been watching you all," he said softly. "I've seen your struggles, your tears, and your regrets. But what I haven't seen is true change. You've started to learn, but you've also forgotten what really matters." At first, the family was stunned. They had no idea Kwame was back. They looked at him, confused and shocked. Amina's eyes widened as she realized that the help they had been receiving was from him. Tariq and Zara stared at him, feeling both relieved and guilty. But as Kwame continued speaking, their feelings of guilt began to shift into something else: betrayal. Amina, who had been trying to find another wealthy man to secure her future, felt embarrassed. She had relied on Kwame's kindness without realizing it. She had looked for someone else to take care of her, thinking that her worth was tied to her wealth, and now she had to face the reality that her husband had never truly stopped caring for her. But the pride she had built up over the years was hard to let go of, and she couldn't help but feel angry at herself for allowing her greed to cloud her judgment. Tariq, who had once been so proud of his father's wealth, felt a deep shame. He had blamed Kwame for their fall from grace, not understanding that it was his own arrogance and entitlement that had caused their problems. As Kwame spoke, Tariq realized that he had been wrong all along. He had treated his father like a tool for getting what he wanted, never once considering the love and sacrifice that had gone into providing for them. But now, with his father standing before him, Tariq couldn't help but feel betrayed. How could his father have left them like that, without saying a word, only to return now? Zara, too, was filled with regret. She had always taken everything for granted, never appreciating her father's hard work. The truth about her actions hit her hard. She had been selfish and blind, focused only on her own desires. But now that she saw the pain in her father's eyes, she understood how much she had hurt him. However, a part of her still felt angry. Why had Kwame put them through this pain? Why had he hidden his love for so long? The betrayal was deep. Kwame's family felt hurt not only by his actions, but also by the realization that they had been deceived. They had taken his love and generosity for granted, and now, in the face of his return, they were forced to confront their own mistakes. But as the tension in the room grew, so did the understanding. They knew they had wronged him, and now they had to face the consequences of their actions. The pain of betrayal was real, but so was the chance for healing. As the days passed after Kwame's revelation to his family, the emotional weight of everything began to settle in. The family was struggling with their guilt, but Kwame was facing an even bigger challenge. He had to decide what to do next. His family was asking for forgiveness, but deep down, Kwame wasn't sure if he could give it so easily. They had betrayed him, but he still loved them. The question was, could he trust them again? Kwame had always been a man of principle, but his heart was torn. On one hand, he wanted to forgive them and give them another chance. After all, they were his family, and deep down, he still believed in the love they had shared before everything went wrong. But on the other hand, he knew that forgiveness would mean allowing them back into his life, knowing they had betrayed him once before. The guilt of his own actions also weighed heavily on him. Kwame had made the decision to leave them without any explanation, without giving them the chance to understand why he had done what he did. He knew that they had learned some valuable lessons, but was it enough? Could they truly change, or would they slip back into their old ways the moment they regained their wealth? Kwame spent many sleepless nights thinking about what to do. He didn't want to see his family suffer any more than they already had, but he also didn't want to let them off too easily. He needed to be sure that they had truly learned from their mistakes, and that they would treat him with the respect he deserved moving forward. Finally, after much soul-searching, Kwame made a decision. He would forgive them, but it wouldn't be easy. He wasn't going to give them a free pass. They would have to prove, through their actions, that they had truly changed. The first step would be rebuilding their trust, something that would take time. Kwame called Amina, Tariq, and Zara together again. "I've thought long and hard about this," he began. "I'm not going to forget what you've done, but I'm willing to give you a chance to prove yourselves. But you have to earn my trust. I won't give it to you just because you ask for it.